Ecology, though a term many have encountered, is often more elusive to define with precision. At its core, it is the study of how living organisms interact with one another, as well as with the non-living elements of their surroundings. In essence, it is the science of relationships, both among organisms and between organisms and the physical world that sustains them. The principal aim of ecology is to understand where and why living things occur where they do, and in what numbers. Achieving this understanding requires drawing from a broad range of scientific fields. Disciplines such as biochemistry, physiology, and molecular biology all contribute to this pursuit, as do broader studies in evolution, biodiversity, geology, and climatology. There is also a role for chemistry and physics, particularly when ecological studies require modeling or predictive analysis. Mathematics, after all, tends to show up at any party involving serious thought. Ecologists approach their subject through four main lenses: the organismal, the population, the community, and the ecosystem levels. At the organismal level, the focus is on how individual beings respond to and interact with their immediate environment. Moving up, the population level investigates changes in populations over time. Why, for example, a species may thrive in one decade and decline in the next. The community level examines how multiple species interact, often in complex and unexpected ways. Finally, ecosystem ecology takes the broadest view, considering both living, biotic, and non-living, abiotic components, things like water, soil, and air, as an integrated whole. Beyond the academic intrigue, ecology has practical value. Understanding ecological systems helps society address basic needs, securing food, maintaining shelter, and improving public health. Ecologists do their work in a range of settings, from laboratories to the field, and those fields can be remarkably diverse, from the quiet stream behind a university to the scalding vents on the ocean floor. Applied ecology also plays a role in resource management. Populations such as white-tailed deer may be studied and managed for hunting, while timber stands of aspen are monitored for sustainable paper production. Ecologists take on a variety of roles, including that of educator, teaching across universities, schools, museums, and nature centers. Others serve in advisory capacities, shaping or crafting policy at multiple levels of government. Some do both. Becoming an ecologist typically starts with an undergraduate degree in a natural science, followed by more focused training or an advanced degree, depending on one's specialty. A solid grasp of the physical sciences, mathematics, and statistics is essential, which is unfortunate for anyone hoping to avoid numbers altogether. On a planetary scale, many forces, both living and non-living, shape life as we know it. The biosphere, while vast to any one of us, occupies only the most modest sliver of the known universe. It stretches several kilometers into the sky and reaches into the deepest parts of the oceans. Its contents, communities of life, are molded by climate, geography, and other abiotic factors, which together dictate which organisms will be found where. And so, while ecology may start with questions about beetles and bushes, it ends with insights about life itself. Biogeography is the study of where living things occur across the globe and the non-living, or abiotic, factors that shape those patterns. These abiotic factors, things like temperature and rainfall, vary largely with latitude and elevation. As these environmental conditions shift, so too do the plant and animal communities they support. Imagine setting off on a walk from the equator heading north. Initially, you'd find yourself in tropical wet forests, where broad-leaved evergreen trees dominate. As you move farther from the equator, these give way to seasonally dry forests, where trees become more scattered. The air becomes drier, the temperature begins to shift, and by the time you reach around 30 degrees north latitude, deserts begin to appear, defined primarily by their low rainfall. Keep going north and deserts yield to grasslands, or prairies, and in turn, those are replaced by temperate forests, where the trees shed their leaves each year. Moving farther still, you reach the boreal forests of the subarctic. Finally, at the top of this latitudinal ladder, you find yourself in the Arctic tundra, home to only the hardiest species adapted to the most punishing conditions. This gradual transition mirrors not only the shift in climate, but also the succession of species finely tuned to those changing environments. And yet, similar changes in ecosystem types can be found even without shifting latitude. Just walk up a mountain and you'll encounter a comparable gradient. Interestingly, ecosystems at the same latitude don't always resemble one another. Air and ocean currents, like the jet stream and the Gulf Stream, help explain why. Climate is a global game with many players. Ecologists interested in biogeography examine these patterns of species distribution. No species is truly ubiquitous. Take the Venus flytrap, for instance. It's found naturally only in a limited region of North and South Carolina. Such a species is referred to as endemic, restricted to a particular geographic area. In contrast, generalists like the raccoon range widely, in this case across most of North and Central America. The distribution of species is shaped over long evolutionary timescales, influenced by both biotic interactions and the physical environment. Biogeography has been intertwined with evolutionary theory since the 18th century, as researchers noticed that the most distinct groupings of plants and animals were often found in regions that had been geographically isolated for millions of years. Australia is perhaps the textbook example. It's estimated to harbor between 600,000 and 700,000 species of plants and animals. Roughly 3/4 of its plant and mammal species are endemic. They occur nowhere else on Earth. The isolation has been remarkably effective at keeping outsiders out and insiders in. Sometimes, understanding where species aren't found is just as revealing. Hawaii, for example, has no native land reptiles or amphibians, and only one native land mammal, the hoary bat. New Guinea offers another case, with a notable absence of placental mammals across most of the island. Plants follow the same generalist and endemic pattern. Isolated land masses like Australia, Hawaii, and Madagascar often boast a high number of endemic plant species. While biologically fascinating, this also makes them vulnerable. Take the forest gardenia, or Gardenia brighamii, which is native only to Hawaii. It's estimated that only 15 to 20 individual trees remain, an unfortunate testament to the fragile beauty of the endemic. Solar energy, the original currency of nearly all life, is captured by green plants, algae, cyanobacteria, and photosynthetic protists. These organisms convert sunlight into chemical energy, which then fuels the biological processes of everything else that breathes, swims, crawls, or grows. Notably, the availability of light itself can influence the evolutionary trajectory of photosynthesizers. For instance, plants growing beneath the dense canopy of a temperate forest must contend with significant shading. As trees above leaf out fully in the late spring, the understory is plunged into shadow. To survive this annual dimming, understory plants have evolved particular strategies. One notable approach is the rapid life cycle of spring ephemerals, such as the spring beauty. These plants grow quickly and reproduce early in the season, taking full advantage of the brief window of full sunlight before the canopy closes overhead. In aquatic systems, the problem of limited light takes on a different character. Water absorbs sunlight, as do plants, suspended particles, and countless microorganisms drifting through the currents. The deeper one goes into a lake, pond, or ocean, the dimmer it gets, until eventually no light at all can penetrate. In these aphotic zones, photosynthesis becomes impossible. In response, aquatic life has developed various adaptations. Some plants keep their photosynthetic tissues close to the water's surface. A classic example is the water lily, with its broad floating leaves basking in the sun. These plants are, in a very literal sense, dead in the water without sunlight. Elsewhere, in the absolute absence of light, say, at the base of hydrothermal vents, some bacteria have gone a different route altogether, extracting energy from inorganic chemicals. No sunlight required. Evolution in this case was not deterred by the dark. Beyond light, nutrient availability is another critical factor in aquatic energy dynamics. In the open ocean, when organisms die, they often sink to the bottom, carrying their nutrient load with them. Unless something stirs the depths, these nutrients remain sequestered far below the reach of photosynthetic life. Enter ocean upwelling. This process is driven by winds blowing along coastal waters. As surface water is pushed offshore, deeper waters rise to take its place. With this upward flow comes a return of nutrients from long-dead organisms, offering a fresh supply to fuel the next cycle of life. Freshwater systems, though smaller in scale, operate under a similar principle of nutrient recycling, albeit with a seasonal rhythm. In many northern lakes, nutrient redistribution is driven by changes in air temperature and the resulting formation and breakdown of a thermocline, a distinct layer in the water column where temperature differs sharply from surrounding layers. During winter, lake surfaces may freeze over, creating a barrier that blocks oxygen exchange with the air. Beneath the ice, the water remains slightly warmer, with the warmest and densest layer resting at the bottom, around 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. But this deeper layer is also oxygen poor, as decomposition continues to consume what little oxygen remains, and the surface ice prevents new oxygen from entering. Come spring, temperatures rise, the ice melts, and the surface water warms to 4 degrees Celsius, matching the density of the bottom layer. This causes the surface water to sink and displace the deeper, nutrient-laden water, which in turn rises to the top. The result is a thorough mixing of water layers and nutrients, known as spring turnover. Summer then arrives with its characteristic thermal stratification. Warmer water on the surface, cooler layers below. As autumn progresses and temperatures drop, surface waters cool once again to around 4 degrees Celsius, becoming heavy enough to sink and initiate a second mixing, the fall turnover. This seasonal shuffle brings oxygen from the surface to the lake bottom and lifts nutrients back up. But once winter sets in, the surface freezes, isolating the lake once more. Decomposers and bottom-dwelling organisms slowly consume the available oxygen, biding their time until spring returns to stir the waters again. Temperature influences life at every level. from the activity of enzymes within a cell to the range of a species across a continent. At the biochemical level, temperature directly affects the function and stability of enzymes, which are crucial for all metabolic processes. Most enzymes perform optimally within a narrow temperature band. Below freezing, metabolism slows to a crawl or stops altogether. Above about 45 degrees Celsius, enzymes begin to degrade, disrupting the delicate choreography of life. This is why relatively few organisms are found in extreme thermal environments, although, of course, exceptions exist. To survive, organisms must either regulate their internal temperatures or restrict themselves to environments where external conditions fall within tolerable limits. Some animals have evolved mechanisms to endure fluctuations, such as hibernation in winter or torpor in reptiles. Certain bacteria, known as extremophiles, have taken things a step further, thriving in places like geysers and hydrothermal vents where heat would destroy most other forms of life. Temperature also plays a central role in defining where organisms can live. Migration is one strategy many species employ to cope with seasonal changes. This movement from one habitat to another allows animals to escape inhospitable temperatures, find food, or secure breeding grounds. The Arctic tern, for instance, embarks on a staggering 40,000-kilometer annual round trip between the polar north and the southern oceans. Monarch butterflies make their way from the eastern United States to Mexico each year in search of more temperate conditions. Even large mammals such as reindeer migrate long distances, about 5,000 kilometers annually, in search of sustenance. Reptiles and amphibians are somewhat more restricted in their distribution, in part because they lack the mobility required for migration, and not all animals capable of migrating choose to do so. The journey itself is fraught with risk and demands a considerable expenditure of energy. For some animals, endurance is the preferred solution. Hibernation enables survival through cold periods by dramatically reducing metabolic activity. A related process, estivation, allows animals to weather periods of intense heat and drought. Both are forms of torpor, a state of lowered physiological activity that allows an organism to wait out adverse conditions. Among the more curious adaptations is the ability of the wood frog to survive freezing temperatures using an antifreeze-like substance within its cells, which protects cellular integrity and prevents ice crystals from rupturing membranes. Not exactly cozy, but effective. Plant growth and the total production of organic matter depends heavily on two key environmental factors: temperature and moisture. These two variables govern a plant's capacity to perform photosynthesis, which in turn determines how much energy is available for the rest of the ecosystem. The concept of net primary productivity, the amount of carbon fixed through photosynthesis minus the amount lost through respiration, provides a measure of how much organic material remains to be used as food. In terrestrial ecosystems, this is typically gauged by assessing the above-ground biomass per unit area. All the plant mass you can see, though it notably excludes roots and any other hidden growth below the soil line. This leads to a slight understatement of productivity in systems with deep or extensive root networks. The environments that boast the highest levels of biomass are, perhaps unsurprisingly, those that are both warm and wet. These conditions create a kind of botanical ideal. Photosynthesis occurs rapidly, enzymatic reactions hum along efficiently, and stomata, the tiny pores in leaves responsible for gas exchange, can remain open to take in carbon dioxide without excessive water loss. This trifecta ensures maximal biomass production. The lush growth above ground then provides both habitat and nourishment for a wide variety of animal life. On the other end of the spectrum, environments that are dry, cold, or both tend to limit plant growth. With slower photosynthesis and lower energy input, less biomass is produced. This scarcity ripples through the food chain, resulting in sparser and more specialized animal populations. Beyond temperature and moisture, the availability of inorganic nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus also plays a pivotal role in determining where plants can grow and how robustly. These nutrients are drawn from the soil as water moves through plant roots. Soil characteristics, its particle size, pH, and nutrient content, therefore have a direct influence on plant distribution. Since animals obtain these nutrients secondhand, by consuming plants or other animals, their distributions closely follow the availability of suitable food sources. In some cases, this connection becomes dynamic, with animals actively tracking the movements of their dietary staples as they shift across the landscape. Water, indispensable for all living things, plays a central role in the most fundamental cellular processes. On land, organisms face the persistent threat of water loss through simple diffusion. To cope, they've developed a variety of adaptations to retain moisture. Many animals, for example, are covered in oily or waxy coatings that serve as moisture barriers. Plants, too, are not without their tricks. Their leaves often boast waxy cuticles and fine hairs, both features that help minimize water loss by slowing the process of transpiration. Interestingly, being immersed in water doesn't exempt an organism from water balance concerns. Aquatic life has its own suite of problems and solutions. Freshwater organisms, living in environments where the surrounding water has a lower solute concentration than their internal fluids, are under constant osmotic pressure. Water wants to rush in. To deal with this, these organisms must actively regulate solute levels, often by excreting large volumes of very dilute urine. Marine organisms face the opposite issue. Salt water is more concentrated than their internal fluids, so the danger is water loss to the environment. Their adaptations go in the other direction, retaining water while excreting excess salts. A memorable example comes from the marine iguana, which deals with this by sneezing out salt-laden vapor, a surprisingly elegant solution to an unrelenting problem. Other abiotic factors also shape life. Oxygen, for instance, is vital in both terrestrial and aquatic environments. On land, most animals extract oxygen from the air. At high elevations, however, the thinner atmosphere contains fewer oxygen molecules, which can create challenges for respiration. Underwater, oxygen availability depends on several factors, most notably temperature and water movement. Cold, swiftly moving water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm, stagnant water. Salinity, currents, and tides also play significant roles in shaping aquatic habitats. Wind is another important player in the world of abiotic influences. It affects evaporation and transpiration rates, influencing how quickly water is lost from soils and plant surfaces. But wind does more than dry things out. It can transport soil, water, seeds, and even small organisms, shaping ecosystems with its sheer physical force. Finally, fire, perhaps the most dramatic of abiotic factors, is a powerful agent of change in terrestrial ecosystems. Though destructive, Fire can also be essential. Some species, like the jack pine, actually depend on the heat of fire to open their seed cones and complete reproduction. Following a fire, with vegetation cleared and competition reduced, seedlings often have a better shot at survival. Fire also releases nutrients, such as nitrogen, back into the soil through the combustion of organic matter like pine needles. In short, what seems like devastation from one angle may be, from another, an opportunity. Biomes on Earth are broadly categorized into terrestrial and aquatic groups. Terrestrial biomes, situated on land, exhibit considerable diversity and are grouped into major types to help organize the complexity of ecosystems. While these categories are useful, they inevitably mask the finer details. For example, the relative abundance of plant life in the Sonoran Desert in the United States, compared to the stark desolation of Boa Vista, a desert island off Western Africa. Both are deserts, but each tells a very different ecological story. There are 8 principal terrestrial biomes: tropical wet forests, savannas, subtropical deserts, chaparral, temperate grasslands, temperate forests, boreal forests, and Arctic tundra. Each is defined by characteristic ranges of temperature and precipitation, with seasonal variations in both helping to shape the flora and fauna found there. While a biome can be associated with specific regions, similar climate conditions can create similar biomes in entirely different geographic locations. Some biomes, like temperate grasslands and temperate forests, experience well-defined seasons with hot summers and cold winters. In contrast, tropical wet forests enjoy warm temperatures and abundant moisture year-round, resulting in high net primary productivity. Other biomes, such as deserts and tundra, are less productive due to harsh temperatures and limited water availability. The identity of each terrestrial biome lies in its distinct combination of temperature range and precipitation pattern. Tropical wet forests, or tropical rainforests, are located near the equator. Their vegetation is dominated by broad-leaved plants that shed foliage not seasonally, but steadily throughout the year. These forests are considered evergreen, not because individual leaves never fall, but because some are always falling and growing back. They operate in a world without seasonal shifts in sunlight or temperature, with temperatures ranging from 20 to 34 degrees Celsius and consistent daylight of 11 to 16 hours, 12 hours per day. These biomes enjoy an uninterrupted growing season. Rainfall is abundant, ranging annually from 125 to 660 centimeters, 50 to 200 inches, though it does fluctuate month to month. Even the driest month in a tropical wet forest typically receives more rain than some entire biomes do in a year. This climatic stability and moisture abundance drive high plant growth, resulting in significant biomass and extraordinary biodiversity. A single hectare of South American tropical forest may contain between 100 and 300 tree species. These forests are also vertically complex. The forest floor is sparsely vegetated and strewn with decomposing plant matter. Above it lies the understory of short, leafy shrubs. Rising beyond that are taller trees forming a closed upper canopy. And still higher, emergent trees pierce through to the open sky. This layered structure provides a wealth of habitats for plants, fungi, animals, and other organisms. Many species spend their entire lives high above the ground, well adapted to an arboreal existence. Epiphytes, plants that grow harmlessly on other plants, are a common sight throughout this biome. Savannas, in contrast, are tropical grasslands with scattered trees. Found in Africa, South America, and northern Australia, they are warm year-round, with average temperatures ranging from 24 to 29 degrees Celsius, 75 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit, and they receive between 10 and 20 inches of rainfall per year, 40 centimeters, 3.9 to 15.7 inches of rain per year. A lengthy dry season limits the growth of dense tree cover. Instead, grasses and herbaceous plants dominate. Fire is a frequent and natural occurrence in this biome, and plants have evolved strong root systems to survive and regrow after a burn. Subtropical deserts lie roughly between 15 degrees and 30 degrees latitude in both hemispheres, centered around the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. These are extremely dry regions. In some years, evaporation outpaces precipitation entirely. In hot deserts, daytime soil temperatures can exceed 60 degrees Celsius, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, while nights bring freezing conditions. Cold deserts experience daytime highs up to 25 degrees Celsius and nighttime lows below minus 30 degrees Celsius. Annual rainfall rarely exceeds 30 centimeters and is erratic at best. Some areas, like Central Australia and parts of Northern Africa, may see as little as 2 centimeters, 0.8 inches, of rain in an entire year. Desert ecosystems, particularly those that are extremely arid, are shaped by scarce and unpredictable rainfall. In these settings, the vegetation is sparse, and animal diversity is relatively low. Perennial plants, those that live for more than 1 year, are often absent in the driest deserts. Instead, many plant species are annuals, capable of germinating, growing, reproducing, and dying in the brief window of favorable conditions that follows rare rainfalls. Those plants that do persist between rains often do so with an arsenal of adaptations. Deep roots to tap underground moisture, reduced foliage to minimize water loss, and thick, water-storing stems. Seeds may lie dormant for years, awaiting the right conditions. Animal life, similarly, adapts through behaviors such as burrowing and being active mainly at night to avoid daytime heat. The chaparral, or scrub forest, is found in places like California, the Mediterranean basin, and coastal Australia. This biome receives between 65 and 75 centimeters, 25.6 to 29.5 inches, of rain annually, most of which falls in winter. Summers are dry, and many plant species lie dormant during this season. The vegetation is dominated by shrubs, many of which are fire adapted. Some plants require fire to trigger germination. The ash left behind by fires returns nutrients like nitrogen to the soil, fostering regrowth in the aftermath. Temperate grasslands, called prairies in North America and steppes in Eurasia, are marked by dramatic seasonal temperature swings, hot summers, and cold winters. These variations define the growing season, with plants emerging in spring, flourishing through summer, and winding down in fall. Winter brings dormancy, as water is locked in ice, and temperatures fall below the threshold for growth. Annual precipitation ranges from 25 to 75 centimeters, 9.8 to 29.5 inches, with trees mostly limited to riverbanks. Grasses dominate the landscape, supported by fertile soils densely packed with roots and rhizomes. These underground structures not only anchor plants, but also replenish soil organic matter as they decay. Fire is a regular disturbance, often started by lightning. In fact, Fire suppression can lead to the invasion of shrubs and trees, and so controlled burns are sometimes used to preserve the character of the grassland. Temperate forests, common in parts of North America, Europe, Asia, Chile, and New Zealand, occupy mid-latitude regions and experience temperatures from -30 to 30 degrees Celsius, or -22 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, with evenly distributed rainfall ranging from 75 to 150 centimeters, 29.5 to 59 inches, annually. These forests have well-defined seasons. Deciduous trees dominate, losing their leaves each fall and entering dormancy through winter. This pattern results in a lower net primary productivity than tropical wet forests, and with fewer tree species overall. The forest canopy provides substantial shade, though not as extensively as in tropical forests, and the trees here are typically shorter. The forest floor is layered with leaf litter, a valuable source of nutrients and habitat. As it decomposes, this litter enriches the soil and supports a range of invertebrates and their predators, such as the red-backed salamander. Boreal forests, or taiga, lie just south of the Arctic and span much of Canada, Alaska, Russia, and northern Europe. These forests endure long, dry winters and short, cool, moist summers. Annual precipitation ranges from 40 to 100 centimeters, 15.7 to 39 inches, mostly as snow. Evaporation is minimal due to persistent cold. The vegetation is dominated by evergreen conifers like pines and spruces, adapted to retain their needle-like leaves year-round. These needles are more energy efficient to maintain than the broad leaves of deciduous trees, allowing conifers to photosynthesize earlier in spring. The soil in boreal forests is typically acidic and nitrogen poor. Because needles decompose slowly, nutrient cycling is sluggish, contributing to low plant diversity and lower net primary productivity compared to more temperate biomes. Still, boreal forests store considerable above-ground biomass due to the longevity of their trees. Structurally, they are simpler than tropical forests, often comprising just a tree layer and a ground layer. North of the boreal forest lies the Arctic tundra, stretching across the upper reaches of the northern hemisphere. Winters are severe, averaging -34 degrees Celsius, while summers are brief and cool, with temperatures ranging from 3 to 12 degrees Celsius, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The growing season is only about 10 to 12 weeks, but nearly continuous daylight during this period enables rapid plant growth. Precipitation is low, and like the boreal forest, evaporation is minimal. Tundra vegetation is typically low-lying due to strong winds and the presence of permafrost, permanently frozen ground that inhibits root growth and slows organic decay. This limits nutrient availability and results in low primary productivity, minimal above-ground biomass, and sparse species diversity. However, during the brief summer, the tundra can be carpeted with mosses, lichens, and small flowering plants, taking full advantage of the short window of relative abundance. Aquatic biomes, encompassing both saltwater and freshwater ecosystems, operate under a different set of rules than their terrestrial counterparts. While many of the same abiotic factors, light, temperature, nutrients, are relevant, the medium of water brings its own set of complexities. Sunlight, which governs the structure of terrestrial systems such as forests, is equally pivotal in aquatic environments, particularly where water depth becomes a limiting factor for light penetration. Even in the clearest water, light absorption occurs naturally. As one descends into a body of water, there comes a point where sunlight can no longer reach. This is not simply a matter of visibility, it defines the boundary for where photosynthesis, and thus many forms of life, can occur. On land, transient factors like fog or dust might obscure sunlight, but these are temporary. In water, the decline of light with depth is constant and predictable, shaping entire ecosystems. In freshwater systems, stratification, layering based on temperature and density, is one of the most critical abiotic forces. It controls nutrient cycling, influences oxygen distribution, and is closely tied to the energy dynamics of light. Water's thermal properties, its tendency to heat and cool slowly, affect everything from local lake conditions to global climate systems. In marine systems, the influence of large-scale water movements, currents, is pronounced. These currents distribute heat and nutrients across vast distances and play a substantial role in regulating Earth's weather patterns. While freshwater systems have currents of their own, especially in rivers, these large-scale circulations are far less significant in lakes and ponds. The ocean itself is divided into various zones that help describe both depth and proximity to land. The entire open water column is called the pelagic realm, stretching from the surface all the way down. The benthic realm, by contrast, runs along the ocean floor, from shallow coastal areas to the deepest trenches. Within the pelagic zone lies the photic zone, the upper layer, roughly the top 200 meters, about 650 feet, where sunlight can still penetrate. This is the domain of photosynthetic organisms like phytoplankton. Below this lies the aphotic zone, a vast expanse where sunlight fails to reach. The majority of the ocean, in fact, is aphotic, dark, cold, and inhospitable to photosynthesis. At its most extreme, the ocean plunges to the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, the deepest known point in the ocean, reaching a depth of about 11,000 meters, or roughly 6.8 miles. For comparison, the average depth of the ocean is around 4,267 meters, or about 14,000 feet. These zones, photic and aphotic, pelagic and benthic, are not unique to the ocean. They also apply to large freshwater lakes, where depth, light, and temperature similarly define the structure and function of aquatic life. The ocean, the planet's largest marine biome, is a vast and continuous expanse of salt water with a surprisingly uniform chemical composition, a dilute mix of mineral salts and decomposed biological material. Within this immense body, we find three notable marine subbiomes: coral reefs, estuaries, and the open ocean itself. Ocean life is largely shaped by how far light penetrates the water column. Zones are defined by depth and light availability, and each supports its own suite of organisms adapted to the distinct conditions there. Closest to shore lies the intertidal zone, the region between high and low tide. While many picture this as a sandy beach, it can just as easily be rocky or muddy. It's an environment in flux, submerged during high tide, exposed during low. Organisms here must endure both dry periods and relentless wave action. Shoreline species such as the shore crab possess hard exoskeletons, providing protection from desiccation and physical stress. The constant agitation of water and sediment means that few rooted plants or algae can gain a foothold. Just beyond is the Eineritic zone, stretching from the edge of the intertidal zone out to about 200 meters deep. roughly where the continental shelf ends. This zone receives ample sunlight, allowing photosynthesis to thrive. Water here is well oxygenated and relatively stable in both temperature and pressure. Floating algae like sargassum provide habitat, while plankton, both plant and animal, form the base of a rich food web that supports small fish, shrimp, and the bulk of global fisheries. Farther out lies the oceanic zone, the open ocean beyond the continental shelf. This region experiences thermal stratification, with warm and cold waters mixing due to currents. Though rich in plankton, nutrients are generally scarce here, making this zone less productive than neritic waters. Dead organisms that once lived near the surface sink to the depths, but unlike freshwater systems, the open ocean lacks a mechanism for circulating those nutrients back to the surface. As a result, much of the deeper ocean relies on a slow rain of biological material from above. Below the pelagic zones lies the benthic realm, the seafloor extending from the shoreline to the deepest ocean trenches. Here, the substrate is composed of sand, silt, and the remains of fallen organisms. As depth increases, temperature drops but stays just above freezing. The benthic realm is nutrient-rich due to the accumulation of organic debris and supports a wide array of life, including sponges, anemones, marine worms, and bottom-dwelling fish. At the bottom of the abyss lies the abyssal zone, found at depths of 4,000 meters and beyond. Conditions here are harsh, intense pressure, near freezing temperatures, and almost complete darkness. Despite the high oxygen levels, nutrients are sparse. Still, life persists. Fishes and invertebrates adapted to the cold and dark live off nutrients delivered from above. At hydrothermal vents scattered across the ocean floor, chemosynthetic bacteria exploit hydrogen sulfide and other minerals as energy sources, anchoring a food web independent of sunlight. Coral reefs form a second major marine biome and are typically found in warm, shallow waters within the photic zone, often between 30 degrees north and south latitude. These structures are built by colonial marine invertebrates, corals, which secrete calcium carbonate skeletons over time. Coral reefs can be adjacent to land, fringing reefs, circular around submerged islands, atolls, or extensive offshore formations like the Great Barrier Reef. Most shallow water corals have a symbiotic relationship with photosynthetic algae, which supply much of the energy the corals need in nutrient-poor tropical waters. In deeper, colder waters, where light is scarce or absent, corals lack these algal partners and instead rely on stinging tentacles to catch prey. Coral reefs are among the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, supporting over 4,000 species of fish. Some fish feed directly on coral, others graze on algae or inhabit the cryptofauna, the myriad invertebrates tucked into the coral's calcium framework. At the reef's edge, one finds an assortment of predators, herbivores, and planktivores. Predators hunt other animals, herbivores consume plant matter, and planktivores feast on the drifting plankton that sustains so many oceanic food webs. Freshwater biomes encompass lakes and ponds, rivers and streams, and wetlands. These environments provide essential ecosystem services to humans, including drinking water, irrigation, sanitation, and industrial support. Because lakes and ponds are set within terrestrial landscapes, they are shaped by the abiotic and biotic conditions of those surroundings. Lakes and ponds vary greatly in size, from small backyard pools to expansive inland seas. Temperature plays a significant role in structuring life within them. In summer, these bodies of water become thermally stratified. The surface warms under the sun, while deeper layers remain cool, preventing mixing. The photic zone, where sunlight penetrates, is home to phytoplankton, such as algae and cyanobacteria. These organisms carry out photosynthesis and form the foundation of the aquatic food web. Zooplankton, such as rotifers and small crustaceans, feed on phytoplankton, while bacteria break down sinking organic matter in the aphotic depths. Nitrogen and phosphorus are crucial limiting nutrients in these systems. When excess amounts enter the water, typically from agricultural runoff or sewage, they trigger algal blooms. These blooms can block sunlight, effectively turning the entire water column aphotic. When the algae die and decompose, they consume vast quantities of oxygen, creating so-called dead zones, where most aquatic life cannot survive. Such ecological disruptions are common, notably in places like Lake Erie and the Gulf of Mexico. Rivers and streams are defined by constant movement, transporting water from headwaters to lakes or oceans. The source water, the origin point, is typically clear, cold, and low in nutrients. The channel at this point is narrow, and the current fast, which discourages sediment accumulation and phytoplankton growth. Instead, photosynthesis is carried out by algae attached to rocks. Energy also enters these ecosystems from surrounding terrestrial environments, such as when leaves fall into the water and decompose, contributing nutrients. Organisms here are adapted to the fast flow. Leeches, for example, anchor themselves with suckers, while trout, a key predator, are streamlined for swift currents. As rivers travel away from their source, they widen, slow, and warm. Sediment begins to accumulate, allowing phytoplankton to thrive. This makes the water murkier. Worms and insects burrow into the mud, and vertebrates such as frogs, fish, and waterfowl, relying less on sight and more on taste or chemical detection, hunt in these quieter waters. Wetlands are shallow ecosystems where soil is permanently or periodically saturated. Unlike lakes, wetlands are defined by emergent vegetation, plants rooted in waterlogged soil with parts extending above the surface. These systems include marshes, swamps, bogs, mudflats, and salt marshes. They all share three defining traits: saturated soil, hydrology, water-loving vegetation, hydrophytic, and water-adapted soils, hydric. Marshes and swamps have slow, steady water flow. Bogs, on the other hand, develop in areas with little or no water movement. These typically form in depressions with clay bottoms that prevent water from percolating through the soil. As a result, water is stagnant, oxygen depleted, and decomposition is slow. This leads to an accumulation of organic acids, lowering the water's pH. At these lower pH levels, nitrogen becomes unavailable, an essential nutrient for plant growth. Some bog plants like sundews, pitcher plants, and Venus flytraps adapt by capturing and digesting insects to extract nitrogen. Because of the limited nutrients and oxygen, bogs have low net primary productivity. Estuaries are unique biomes where freshwater rivers meet the ocean, creating brackish environments with fluctuating salinity. These areas serve as vital nurseries for many marine species, offering protection and a rich, though physiologically challenging, environment. The salinity in estuaries shifts frequently with the tides, creating short-term changes that test the adaptability of their inhabitants. Many plants in estuaries are halophytes, salt-tolerant species. Some use root filters to remove salt, while others pump oxygen into their roots. Animal life includes mollusks like mussels and clams, which adapt behaviorally to changing salinity. When exposed to low salinity, they close their shells, cease feeding, and switch to anaerobic respiration. When high tide returns, bringing more oxygen and higher salinity, they open their shells and resume normal functions. It's a delicate, energy-intensive balancing act in a habitat defined by constant change. Imagine spending a quiet afternoon boating down a sunlit river when suddenly you're struck in the head by a 20-pound silver carp. This isn't a hypothetical. In rivers and canals across Illinois and Missouri, the presence of Asian carp has made such incidents possible, if not exactly common, then certainly no longer outlandish. This group of species, which includes the silver black, grass, and bighead carp, has been a staple of aquaculture in China for over 1,000 years. There, it's a valued food source. In the United States, however, these carp are invasive, disrupting the balance of aquatic communities and threatening native species. Populations are not static. They change in size and distribution due to a host of influences, ranging from seasonal shifts and natural disasters to inter- and intraspecific competition. The study of how populations fluctuate over time, population dynamics, falls under the broader field of demography, a statistical approach originally developed for human populations, but now applied universally across species. Tools like life tables, once used by insurance companies to estimate human life expectancy, are now used to understand the life cycles and survival rates of everything, from insects to elephants. When examining a population, the first task is usually to estimate how many individuals there are and how they are spaced. Two core concepts, population size, N, and population density, form the foundation of this understanding. Larger populations may benefit from greater genetic diversity, potentially giving them a survival edge. Conversely, in a population with low density, individuals may struggle to find mates, even if total numbers are sufficient. Interestingly, smaller organisms tend to occur at higher densities than larger ones, reflecting differences in resource needs and spatial use. The most accurate population count would be a complete census, counting every individual. This is rarely feasible. Instead, scientists employ sampling methods to estimate population size and density. For immobile or slow-moving species, a method called the quadrat technique is commonly used. A quadrat is a square frame of a known size, laid randomly throughout the study area. Researchers count the organisms inside each square, repeating the process enough times to generate a reliable estimate for the entire habitat. The size and number of quadrats are tailored to the species under study. Small plants like daffodils might require a 1 square meter quadrat, while widely spaced redwoods would demand something much larger. For more mobile creatures, birds, fish, mammals, a different method, mark and recapture, is preferred. A sample of animals is captured, marked in a harmless way, and released. After some time, a second sample is taken, and the ratio of marked to unmarked animals is used to estimate the total population. The idea is simple. If few marked individuals are recaptured, the total population is likely large. If many are recaptured, the population is probably small. This method has limitations. Animals might become trap-shy after their first encounter, avoiding the second round. Others might be unusually attracted to the traps. And of course, some marking methods may inadvertently affect the animal's survival. More advanced methods now supplement or replace older ones. Animals are tagged with radio transmitters for electronic tracking, or population estimates are drawn from commercial harvest data. Each technique provides a different window into population size and health. Beyond numbers, researchers also look at distribution patterns, how individuals are spaced within a habitat. These patterns reveal whether individuals cluster, spread evenly, or scatter randomly, and they can reflect underlying biological and environmental forces at work at any given moment. Individuals within a population can be arranged in space in several ways, reflecting both biological interactions and environmental conditions. These arrangements, called dispersion patterns, fall into three main categories: uniform, random, and clumped. Uniform dispersion is often observed in species that compete directly with one another for space or resources. For example, sage plants like Salvia leucophylla release chemicals into the soil that inhibit the growth of nearby competitors, a strategy known as allelopathy. Penguins, too, exemplify uniformity by spacing their nests evenly to maintain territories. In contrast, random dispersion arises when individuals are spread without a predictable pattern, often influenced by passive dispersal. Wind-dispersed seeds, such as those of dandelions, land and germinate wherever conditions happen to be favorable. Then there is clumped dispersion, perhaps the most common in nature. This pattern is seen in organisms that aggregate for social, reproductive, or resource-related reasons, such as herds of elephants or schools of fish. Clumping can also result from environmental patchiness, where resources like food or shelter are unevenly distributed. The way individuals are dispersed offers insight into their behavior and ecology beyond what density alone can reveal. Low-density populations may struggle with reproduction, especially if individuals are solitary and randomly distributed, while clumped distributions can enhance reproductive success simply through proximity. While population size and density describe a population at a single moment, demography studies how populations change over time, focusing on birth rates, death rates, and life expectancy. These demographic traits are influenced by population size, density, distribution, sex ratio, and age structure. For instance, a larger population may have a higher birth rate due to more reproductive individuals, but it may also suffer from higher death rates due to disease, competition, and waste accumulation. A skewed sex ratio, or a population dominated by individuals of reproductive age, can further tilt birth rates. Population growth or decline hinges on the relationship between births and deaths. If they are equal, the population is stable. If births exceed deaths, the population grows. If deaths outpace births, it shrinks. Life expectancy, the average time an individual is expected to live, also shapes population structure and resource use. To study these dynamics, ecologists use life tables, which break populations into age cohorts and provide statistics on mortality and survival. Originally developed for the insurance industry, these tables show how many individuals die at each age interval, the likelihood of death before the next birthday, mortality rate, and expected remaining lifespan. Consider a life table for Dall mountain sheep. The mortality rate spikes early in life and again in old age. If a sheep survives to age 1, it can expect to live another 7.7 years on average. This sort of data helps reveal not just how long individuals live, but when they are most vulnerable. Another essential tool is the survivorship curve, which graphs the number of surviving individuals over time, often drawing from life table data. These curves reveal life history strategies across species. Type Y curves, typical of humans and many primates, show low mortality early in life and increasing mortality with age. These species usually have few offspring and invest heavily in parental care. Type 2 curves, seen in birds and some reptiles, indicate a roughly constant death rate across all ages. These organisms often have moderate reproductive rates and some level of parental investment. Type 3 curves, found in trees, fish, and many invertebrates, display high juvenile mortality. These species produce vast numbers of offspring, few of which survive, and they provide little or no parental care. The strategy relies on numbers. Many will die, but a few will live long enough to reproduce and sustain the population. Together, dispersion patterns, demographic traits, life tables, and survivorship curves offer a comprehensive picture of how populations exist, interact, and evolve in the face of environmental pressures. A species' life history encompasses the full arc of its biological existence, how energy is allocated to growth, maintenance, and reproduction across its lifetime. These life history traits, embedded in the species' genetics, are molded by natural selection and environmental pressures. They ultimately determine how a species invests in its future. Energy, as always, is the limiting factor. All organisms need it, and none have enough to do everything at once. Plants absorb sunlight and convert it into chemical energy, which they must then divide between growing, surviving, and producing seeds. Animals face similar trade-offs, but with the added complication of needing to expend energy in order to acquire food in the first place. For some species, energy is also invested in parental care, sometimes at great personal cost. Every organism must therefore manage its energy budget, balancing metabolic needs, reproduction, survival strategies, and occasionally energy storage for future use, as in bears storing fat for hibernation. One key life history trait is fecundity, the potential reproductive capacity of an individual. High fecundity species produce as many offspring as possible, as often as possible, often with little or no parental involvement. This is common in many marine invertebrates. Their offspring are typically small and independent from birth, as the energy cost of parenting would outweigh any evolutionary benefit. These organisms rely on numbers. Most offspring won't survive, but some will. It's a volume strategy, one that hedges against an unforgiving world. In contrast, species with low fecundity produce fewer offspring and devote significant energy to raising them. Mammals like humans, kangaroos, and pandas provide extended care, and their young are born helpless. In these cases, the investment per offspring is substantial, and survival is more heavily influenced by parental protection and guidance. Plants, too, reveal this trade-off. Low fecundity plants, like coconuts or chestnuts, produce fewer but energy-rich seeds with high chances of germination. High fecundity plants, such as orchids, scatter many tiny energy-poor seeds into the world, most of which never take root. But again, some do, enough to carry the species forward. The timing of reproduction is another axis of life history strategy. Reproducing early increases the chances of passing on genes, but often limits growth and health. Reproducing later can lead to better prepared parents or higher fecundity, but comes with the risk of not surviving to reproductive age. Small fish like guppies reproduce early and often, but remain vulnerable. Larger fish, like sharks or bluegills, grow stronger first, gambling longevity against reproductive opportunity. Each strategy reflects a careful evolutionary calculus tailored to environmental pressures and survival odds. These reproductive strategies can be broadly grouped. Semilparity is the all-in approach. Organisms reproduce once and then die. Bamboo flowers a single time. The Chinook salmon migrates back to its birthplace, expends its remaining energy to spawn, and promptly dies, perhaps due to hormonal self-destruction, perhaps from sheer exhaustion. In either case, the sacrifice may serve an evolutionary function, such as providing nutrients for the next generation. Iteroparity describes species that reproduce multiple times over their lifespan. Some, like the pronghorn antelope, reproduce only during specific seasons when hormonal changes prepare the body for mating. Others, such as humans and chimpanzees, can reproduce year-round, though actual conception is only possible during brief windows of ovulation. In both cases, the strategy is not about a single gamble, but a series of chances, playing the long game in evolutionary terms. Whether a species chooses to burn bright and die, or pace itself for the long haul, life history reflects the hard choices built into biology. Each organism is shaped by the invisible arithmetic of energy, time, and survival. In nature, populations do not exist in isolation. Virtually all species share their habitat with others, and the interactions among these populations are fundamental to the structure and function of their environment. When multiple populations coexist in a given space and time, they form what is known as a community. This ecological community includes all populations present within a specific area, interacting in ways that influence their distribution, abundance, and evolutionary trajectories. The composition of a community is often described by its species diversity, a measure that takes into account both the number of species present and their relative abundance. Some environments, such as the glaciers of Antarctica, are home to only a few hardy species, yet even here, life persists in surprising forms. In contrast, tropical rainforests are so densely populated with diverse life forms that cataloging them fully is a daunting, perhaps impossible task. These biomes represent the extremes of species diversity, and many communities fall somewhere in between. At the community level, ecologists study how species interact through competition, predation, mutualism, and other relationships, and how these interactions regulate population growth and maintain ecological balance. The competition for resources, such as food, water, space, or sunlight, is one of the key forces shaping the structure of communities. In nature, populations do not exist in isolation. Virtually all species share their habitat with others. Predation, the pursuit and capture of one organism by another, is one of the most familiar forms of species interaction. It's also a dynamic relationship that influences population sizes in both predator and prey species over time. A textbook example of this relationship is found in the cycles of the lynx and the snowshoe hare, documented over nearly 2 centuries through trapping records in North American forests. The populations of both species rise and fall in roughly 10-year cycles, with lynx numbers lagging a year or two behind those of the hares. As hare numbers increase, lynx have ample food, and their population also grows. However, once lynx become too numerous, they reduce the hare population significantly. This scarcity of prey then causes the lynx population to decline, which in turn allows hare numbers to recover. restarting the cycle. Originally, this predator-prey dynamic was thought to be a self-contained feedback loop, driven by predation alone. More recent research, however, suggests a more complex picture. Factors such as density-dependent stress among hares may contribute to their own population decline. In high densities, maternal stress may reduce fecundity, initiating a population drop independently of lynx predation. Thus, while predation plays a key role, other internal pressures also help shape the cycle. Herbivory, the consumption of plants by animals, is another interspecies interaction that significantly shapes populations. Unlike animals, plants can't run or hide, so they've evolved other means of defense. Some plants deter herbivores through mutualistic relationships, such as using animals to disperse seeds, while others rely on more direct strategies. Defensive mechanisms in both plants and animals fall into four broad categories: mechanical, chemical, physical, and behavioral. Mechanical defenses include thorns, spines, and hard shells, structures that make the organism physically unpalatable or difficult to consume. Chemical defenses can be more insidious. Toxic compounds like those in the foxglove plant can make ingestion deadly. These defenses are common in both plants and animals and can have serious effects on predators. Then there are strategies built around visibility, or in some cases, the lack of it. Camouflage helps organisms avoid detection by blending into their surroundings. Insects like the tropical walking stick resemble twigs so closely that they're nearly invisible when still. Chameleons, with their ability to change color, add a dynamic element to camouflage. At the opposite end of the visibility spectrum is aposematic coloration, the use of bright colors to warn predators of toxicity or danger. The fire-bellied toad, cinnabar moth caterpillar, and various beetles use this strategy effectively. Once a predator samples one of these unpleasant organisms, it learns not to repeat the mistake. Over time, such signals become deeply ingrained in predator behavior, but evolution rarely stops at a single defense. In Batesian mimicry, harmless species adopt the warning coloration of dangerous ones. Many insects, for example, mimic bees or wasps, deterring predators despite lacking a sting or venom. The effectiveness of this mimicry depends on predators having already learned to avoid the real thing. Mullerian mimicry takes this a step further. Here, multiple harmful species evolve to share the same warning coloration, reinforcing the message: don't eat anything that looks like this. The result is a stronger deterrent, as each predator's bad experience reinforces the avoidance of all species within the mimicry ring. One of the more unusual forms of mimicry is Emsleian or Mertensian mimicry. In this case, a deadly species mimics a less harmful one. This may seem counterintuitive, but the logic lies in the predator's ability to learn. If the first encounter with a particular coloration ends in death, no learning occurs. However, if the encounter is unpleasant but non-lethal, say with a mildly venomous species, then the predator is trained to avoid that pattern in the future. A truly dangerous species adopting this pattern can thus benefit from the established aversion. The coral snake and milk snake are often cited in this context, though the model remains somewhat speculative due to the complexity of the interactions involved. In all of these cases, whether through direct confrontation, deceptive appearance, or evolutionary alliances, species interactions like predation and herbivory are not static. They are constantly evolving, driving adaptations on both sides of the equation in an ongoing biological arms race. In any habitat, resources such as food, water, light, and space are finite. When multiple species rely on the same limited resources, competition inevitably arises. Each species occupies an ecological niche, its unique role in the environment, encompassing how it obtains resources, how it survives, and how it interacts with other species. The competitive exclusion principle posits that no two species can occupy the same niche indefinitely in the same habitat. If they do, one will outcompete the other, leading to the exclusion or local extinction of the less competitive species. This concept is neatly illustrated by the classic laboratory experiment involving two species of protozoa, Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum. Grown separately, both species flourish. Grown together in the same environment, P. aurelia consistently outcompetes P. caudatum for food, resulting in the latter's decline and eventual extinction from the shared habitat. But nature often finds a way around direct conflict. When species evolve to minimize competition by using different resources or operating under different conditions, the outcome is resource partitioning. This allows similar species to coexist in overlapping habitats by carving out distinct ecological roles. A vivid example of resource partitioning can be seen in the anole lizards of Puerto Rico. Though they may look similar at a glance, these lizards have adapted to occupy distinct microhabitats. Some prefer the ground, others live high in the tree canopy. They differ in their use of vegetation type, sunlight exposure, and humidity levels. Each species has carved out its own niche, minimizing direct competition and allowing for the coexistence of multiple anole species in the same general area. In this way, competition does not always lead to exclusion. Through evolutionary change, it can instead promote diversity, driving species to refine their roles in the complex and interwoven fabric of ecological communities. Symbiosis refers to prolonged and close interactions between individuals of different species, interactions that can significantly affect the abundance and distribution of both partners. While some restrict the term to strictly mutualistic relationships, where both parties benefit, the broader definition encompasses a range of relationships, not all of them mutually beneficial. One such relationship is commensalism, where one species benefits while the other is neither helped nor harmed. A straightforward example is a bird nesting in a tree. The bird gains a safe place to lay its eggs, elevated above predators and shielded by branches. The tree, meanwhile, is unaffected. The nest adds negligible weight and does not interfere with photosynthesis, which primarily occurs in leaves higher up. Another example involves clownfish and sea anemones. The clownfish finds protection among the anemone's stinging tentacles, which deter predators. The sea anemone, for its part, experiences no known advantage or harm from this arrangement. Mutualism, in contrast, is a relationship where both species benefit. Termites and the protozoa in their guts are a prime example. Termites consume wood, which is primarily cellulose, a material they cannot digest on their own. Inside the protozoa living in the termite's gut are bacteria that can break down cellulose, turning it into usable energy. In return, the protozoa and their bacteria enjoy a constant supply of food and a safe environment. Lichens offer another case. They consist of fungi partnered with photosynthetic algae or bacteria. The algae produce glucose through photosynthesis, feeding both themselves and the fungi.
The fungi provide shelter and help absorb atmospheric nutrients, enhancing survival in harsh environments.
The third category is parasitism, where one species, the parasite, benefits at the expense of another, the host. Unlike predators, parasites typically do not kill their hosts outright. Doing so would disrupt their own life cycles. Instead, they extract resources slowly, weakening the host over time. Parasitic life cycles are often complex. For instance, tapeworms are transmitted to humans through undercooked, contaminated meat. Once inside the human intestine, the tapeworm absorbs nutrients and can grow to considerable lengths, sometimes exceeding 50 feet. It continues its development by cycling through multiple hosts, often starting in livestock and finishing in humans. Plasmodium falciparum, the protozoan responsible for malaria, offers another example. It reproduces within human liver and red blood cells, but requires a mosquito host to complete its reproductive cycle. The mosquito transmits the parasite from person to person, making it a vector for this significant global disease. This pattern of a parasite cycling between multiple host species is common among many parasitic organisms and highlights the intricate strategies life uses to persist, even at the expense of another. Ecological communities are intricate systems defined by both structure, the types and numbers of species present, and dynamics, the way these communities change over time. Understanding both aspects is essential for managing ecosystems effectively and sustainably. At the base of many communities are foundation species, organisms that have a disproportionate influence on the community's structure, often by shaping the physical environment. These species are frequently primary producers. Kelp, for example, is a type of brown algae that supports entire underwater forests off the California coast. By forming dense canopies, kelp alters light levels, water flow, and available space, thereby enabling a wide variety of other organisms to flourish. Corals offer another example. Though not photosynthetic themselves, corals form mutualistic relationships with symbiotic dinoflagellates called zooxanthellae. These symbionts perform photosynthesis and supply energy to the coral. In turn, the coral provides a protective home. The calcium carbonate skeletons of both living and dead coral make up the bulk of reef structures, which act as a buffer against ocean currents and provide habitat for an astonishing range of marine life. Biodiversity is a measure of the complexity of a community. It encompasses two main components: species richness, the number of species present, and species evenness, how evenly individuals are distributed among those species. Richness tends to increase in tropical regions near the equator, where temperatures are warm, rainfall is abundant, and seasonal variation is minimal. In contrast, polar regions have lower species richness due to colder, harsher conditions and a shorter history of post-glacial colonization. Additional factors such as habitat predictability, productivity, and even geography influence species richness. The field of island biogeography, for instance, examines how isolated ecosystems like island chains, such as the Galapagos, develop unique patterns of richness based on factors like island size and distance from the mainland. Beyond abundance, the role a species plays in its ecosystem can be crucial. Keystone species have a disproportionately large impact on community structure relative to their abundance. Consider the sea star, Pisaster ochrysius, of the Pacific Northwest. When removed from intertidal ecosystems, mussel populations, normally kept in check by the sea star, grow unchecked, crowding out other species and reducing overall biodiversity. In tropical stream ecosystems, the banded tetra is another example. This fish provides nearly all of the phosphorus needed by the community. If it were to vanish, the nutrient dynamics of the entire stream would shift dramatically. Then there are invasive species, organisms introduced, often by human activity, into ecosystems where they are not native. These species can disrupt established ecological balances, outcompete native organisms, and reduce biodiversity. In the United States, aquatic ecosystems are under threat from invaders like purple leucostrife and zebra mussels. Forests face challenges from species such as garlic mustard, common buckthorn, and the emerald ash borer. Even urban areas feel the impact, with species like the European starling competing aggressively with native birds for nesting sites. Together, foundation species, keystone species, and invasive species demonstrate how certain organisms can dramatically shape the communities they inhabit, sometimes supporting entire ecosystems, other times destabilizing them. Understanding their roles is essential for both conservation and restoration efforts. Communities are not static. They change over time, sometimes gradually, sometimes dramatically. These changes, referred to as community dynamics, can arise from environmental disturbances or from the natural progression of biological processes. While some communities maintain a relatively stable structure, or equilibrium, others may be reshaped, temporarily or permanently, by forces such as volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, storms, fires, or shifts in climate. One of the most studied processes in community dynamics is succession, the sequential arrival and disappearance of species in an ecosystem over time. Succession can be primary or secondary, depending on the starting conditions. Primary succession begins in places where no life previously existed, such as newly formed volcanic islands or exposed rock surfaces. A vivid example comes from the Big Island of Hawaii, where lava flows create new land at a rate of about 32 acres per year. These barren surfaces, initially inhospitable, are slowly colonized by pioneer species, plants and lichens that can tolerate harsh, low-nutrient conditions. Over time, their growth, death, and decomposition help to create soil, setting the stage for more demanding species to take root. Gradually, the biological community evolves, layer by layer, until a new equilibrium state is reached, one that looks very different from the austere beginnings. Secondary succession occurs in areas where a community has been disturbed but not obliterated. A classic case is the regeneration of oak and hickory forests following a wildfire. Fire may decimate above-ground life and kill animals unable to escape, but the ash left behind returns nutrients to the soil. The tall canopy trees that once dominated are gone, their reign broken. In their place, annual plants make the first comeback, followed by fast-growing grasses and other pioneer species. These, in turn, alter the environment, perhaps by stabilizing soil, adding organic material, or influencing light and moisture conditions, making it suitable for intermediate species, like shrubs and young trees. Over decades to centuries, the forest regenerates. Oak and hickory trees once again rise to dominance, re-establishing a community structure similar to the one before the disturbance. This mature, stable endpoint is known as the climax community, and it will remain until another disturbance resets the process. Through these cycles of change, Succession highlights the resilience of ecosystems and their capacity to regenerate, though always within the limits imposed by local climate, soil, species pools, and disturbance regimes.